All right, welcome in Minnesota high school football fans. I'm here with Coach Lantz, a part of the Lakeville South football coaching staff. He has willingly came on and helped me and the viewers kind of break down this whole section and class of realignment. I myself wanted to have you on just because from my perspective, I think that I don't know like a whole lot about it. Just starting to follow, like I've played in the system of Minnesota high school football, but I haven't really got into like the details on sections and class alignment and how that really works. You've helped me over the past like a month. I've been in contact with you, just kind of guiding me, giving me knowledge of how this works. But I kind of just wanted to have you on to share some knowledge, spread some knowledge, and get the public a little bit excited for the product that's going to be out this fall. So thanks for joining me.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me on. Really excited. I'm a total nerd for all this stuff, and it's nice to have someone else to talk about it with. So,
All right. Well, without further ado, let's get into it. Let's start with Class 6A. We saw some realignment there. I think 3 teams went out, 3 teams went down, although it's a little bit more complicated than that. And I think we can talk about that a little bit as we go. But I'll put the Class 6A, just these are the teams that are going to be on in Class 6A. Don't look at the sections right now. We'll get into the sections, but just talk about the class overall, how this formed, the athletic enrollment that went into it. Just talk about that piece.
Definitely. So something a lot of people don't know that's interesting about 6A is that the top 32 teams in Minnesota, like your big schools, did not really want 6A to exist. It was the next 32 below them. So when 6A was created in, I think, 2012, it's not because EP wanted, hey, let's just have a league with all the big schools. It's more so because, like, your Bloomington Kennedys or your Apple Valleys, like schools around like 13 to 1400 enrollment, didn't want to have to go play like a Wayzata, Minnetonka, or at that time, I think they were all in that old South Suburban Conference that had like Shakopee and Prior Lake, which, well over 2,000 kids both. So that's really what kind of started 6A. And then as far as splitting it up into just the 4 sections of 8 teams, I want to say that mostly took place in 2015, I think was the first year we started doing the full 32 team tournament, which is exclusive to 6A. None of the other classes, 5A through 9-man, do it the way 6A does. And I think it's just because we have that 32 team structure and we split it up like you have here into those 4 sections with 8 teams apiece.
I think you didn't touch on like the athletic enrollment,
Yes.
how that deciphers. It's not like based strictly on like enrollment of the school. It's a little bit more calculated than that, so to speak.
You are absolutely right. So a lot of people think it was just off of the regular school's enrollment, which is not entirely true. So the equation the state high school league uses is they'll take the total number of students enrolled at that school, which is reported by school districts to the Minnesota Department of Education. So that's the official number they're using. Then they take the number of kids that are reported on free and reduced lunch that, again, districts are required to report that to the Minnesota Department of Education. They multiply that number by 0.4, which is 40%, and they subtract that from total enrollment. So it's total number of kids minus 40% of the kids on free and reduced lunch, and then that resulting number is your athletic enrollment, and that's what they use to determine the enrollments for all their athletic classifications. So, for example, I want to say like Prior Lake, because that's the school district I know. Prior Lake High School has about like 2,800 kids normally. When you subtract the number of kids on free and reduced lunch, their athletic enrollment comes down to about 2,652. I know another really good example is Robbinsdale Armstrong. I think their total enrollment's actually bigger than either of the Lakeville schools because they're well over 2,000 kids. But like we said, once you subtract that 40% of kids on free and reduced lunch, it pulls them all the way back down into 5A. I think like middle of 5A too. So
Apple Valley was the 32nd team enrollment wise.
that is correct.
So like without any appeals or anything, Apple Valley would have been the 32nd team in 6A. But there are appeals, and I guess we haven't even talked about that. I wasn't even wanting to get there, but just like the bottom 4 that were kind of as a Forest Lake grad, I knew Forest Lake was kind of going to be like near the 5A, 6A line, wherever that was, and
They're
it
pretty
turned out
close.
like they were really close. And Apple Valley was the 32nd. So Forest Lake technically is um, the last like actual one, if you want to call it that.
Yep,
But
Forest
Apple
Lake
Valley,
is, I
go
believe they're
for it.
actually tied with Andover with 1,642. So Andover and Forest Lake are kind of tied, and then Lakeville South is just above them. So
So yeah, so Apple Valley was the 32nd team. They appealed. Talk about the appeal process. Talk about kind of how that formed, because I reported that I think it was Apple Valley was going to go down and that Coon Rapids is going to go up. And
yep,
technically, I get the way I reported it was me assuming just like that the top 32 teams are going to be 6A, which some people said that Coon Rapids was already 6A last year, and I was trying to tell them, well, you guys weren't going to be 6A this year if something didn't happen to get you guys there.
definitely. Yeah. So I did see that comment on your post when you talked about that. And I think someone was saying, buddy, we've always been 6A. Coon Rapids is one of those teams that's kind of bounced between 5 and 6A. They've been on the cusp. On this last cycle, they were in 6A. And the cycle before that, the 2021 to 22 cycle, they were also in 6A, but I want to say they played a 5A schedule back then. So did Brainerd. So, that puts them in an automatic 7th and 8th seed. So, um, but as far as the athletic enrollment, I've heard two different things on this. The first one that I heard from the president of the state high school league, actually Bob Madison, was when they first got these numbers and they saw Apple Valley was number 32. Um, they realized, well, Apple Valley, I don't even think they have 100 kids total in their football program, ninth grade through varsity. And obviously, there were huge concerns about Apple Valley being able to compete at the 6A level, even if they did put in for a maroon schedule. And so I believe what the state high school league did was they called some of those other teams that were on the cusp. I can't speak for like Burnsville, Spring Lake Park, or Mayo, but I do know for a fact they called Coon Rapids, and Coon Rapids volunteered to come back up. And so that's the one story I've heard. The other one, which we talked about, is Apple Valley put in the official appeal to move back down before the March 7th deadline. The state high school league looked for a team to volunteer to come back up. Coon Rapids volunteers. Therefore, Apple Valley's approved to go back to 5A. So those are the two kind of stories I've heard floated around. But I mean, regardless, we get the same result of Apple Valley goes back down. Coon Rapids is opting up to 6A.
Just talk about like go through the appeal process, just like on a very uh, basic sense for fans that like I think you don't have to go like deep into it, but you have to be within a certain amount like of the next class to appeal down. It's not like Wyzetta or any of the other schools can like appeal to go down.
You were correct. Yeah, so those teams that are like way on the high end can appeal to go down. So it's if your total athletic enrollment is within 10% of the cutoff. So at the time, we thought the cutoff was 1,636. Well, if you take 10% of it, that's about 164 kids if you round that up. Add that to Apple Valley's enrollment, you get a nice round 1,800 students. So any of those 6A teams that had 1,800 students or below had a week from the announcement date, which I think would have put the deadline at March 7th. Okay, actually, they came out on February 28th. That gives them 1 week to put in an official appeal. It's usually done by the athletic director on the state high school league website to move down one class.
Gotcha. Well, let's get into the new teams of 6A before we dive into the sections. We had
Oh, yeah.
Moorhead, Andover, and Rogers all coming up. I guess just start talking. Start talking. You're
For sure. Yeah. I was talking with some of our kids and coaches with this back in October of 2024. 'Cause, Burnsville's enrollment's been on the decline. Buffalo's always been a cusp team. I mean, Mayo has always been 5A. They just kind of jumped up because some other schools had gone around. Whereas, I mean, Andover's a growing community. I want to say Rogers actually had to close their open enrollment because they're just growing so fast up there. I want to say it's the city of, is it Otsego? Is that how you say it? It's a little bit north of Rogers.
don't ask me, but I know you're right that Rogers' population has been growing. And I'm
Exactly,
sure
as because
enrollment is following.
Otsego was within that school's boundaries, and it's one of the fastest growing in Minnesota. So, yeah, it was pretty obvious that not only were they going to be in 6A eventually, but that they're probably going to stick around for a while. And Moorhead's kind of in that same boat as Rogers, and they've been growing rapidly. It was only a matter of time before they made it up here. And I think Rogers and Moorhead are going to stick around for a while. Andover, they're kind of on the cusp. So maybe they'll stay, maybe they won't. I'm not really sure what their enrollment is doing, but there's not a whole lot of development north of Andover, so there's plenty of room for that community to expand in the coming decades, and I think they can compete at 6A too. As far as how the teams are going to compete in 6A, I think they were all kind of waiting to see where they fell in terms of sections. Like, I know talking with some of the Rogers coaches, they were worried that if they ended up in, so we have the graphic up, section 6 with your Edinas, your Minnetonkas. That's a big change going from playing like Monticello. I don't know who else is on their schedule. Maybe like a Spring Lake Park. I think they played Sartell. And then you have to go over and play like Mike Grant and Eden Prairie. Opposite worlds right there in terms of just what you would experience on a Minnesota high school football field. But I think once they kind of saw where they fit together, then I don't think any of them so far have appealed for schedule relief. I know Moorhead was undefeated last year until I think it was the section final against Alexandria, right?
I thought that should have been like the 5A. I mean, I know Elk River won, but that game was just so fun to watch. That could have been the state championship. It should have been higher than what the game was. I think it was the section championship, but
definitely, yeah. And I bet Alexandria is real happy because they don't have Moorhead in their section anymore.
Right.
So
right.
It's same thing you mentioned. Elk River doesn't have to deal with Andover, which is kind of a bummer. We're not going to get those like 50 to 60 point shootouts anymore.
Right.
But yeah, it's kind of hard to say how they're all going to do in 5A. I know Andover has experience playing a lot of the other Section 5 teams. They're in the same school district as like Anoka, Blaine, Champlin, and Coon Rapids. They've run that up-tempo offense. I mean, you're talking snapping the ball within 10 to 15 seconds of the last play. So they're definitely going to have the fastest-paced offense. It's just a matter of defensively, are they going to be able to hold up physically? And when you're running that fast pace of an offense, do you have enough kids that don't play both ways? Because, that's kind of the thing with a lot of these 6A teams that we have the luxury of not worrying about as the lower classes. We don't have a lot of kids that start both ways, whereas like, say, a Stewartville or a Minneota, your smaller classes, you're going to have kids that start both ways.
Yeah. So I think if you're kind of laying this out, and I'm kind of thinking about if I'm Rogers or Andover, like I'm happy about these section placements. Like when I look at it, I'm like, oh, okay. Well, we did move up to 6A, but I think we got in the right section to be able to like be competitive and actually like compete.
Definitely, yeah. I think both Rogers and Andover are feeling that. Because I mean, just looking at their section, I know Coon Rapids has kind of struggled the last few years. Osseo, I think they've won 2 games in the last 2 years. I know 2 years ago.
What's happening with their head coach and right now?
That's true. Yeah, I've heard some rumors about that. I don't know what's going on there. It'll be interesting to see how that shapes up. But the 4 above those, you're Anoka. You can never underestimate. Like, sure, they graduated a lot of seniors this past year, but Coach Wasserich, very offensive-minded coach. He'll be able to rebound really fast. Blaine is one of the most underrated teams of 6A, in my opinion. Everyone's like, oh, it's just another team up north. They don't know how to play defense, but they really got after it last year. They had
Forest Lake.
I know. I was watching some of the film on that, and I'm like, oh boy, Forest Lake got caught a little off guard there. But definitely explosive offense team. I know Coach Law, I think, was the OC at Blaine before he took over as head coach. So again, another offensive-minded guy. And then probably no one's happier about Maple Grove leaving Section 5 than the Centennial Cougars. Coach Diggins does a great job, both Coach Diggins, senior and junior. They're always the hardest hitting team up there, extremely physical. One of the few teams in 6A that still runs a 4-3 defense. And obviously their offense is way different. If you look at the rest of the teams in that division, it's a lot of 10 and 11 personnel, spread offenses, whether it be sidecar or pistol stuff, Rogers and Andover included. And then you have Centennial, which is like 31 personnel, run the ball heavy. Champlin Park a little bit too, but they more so do it out of like 12 personnel with the wing and then twin receivers on the opposite side.
Yep.
But yeah, so we'll see how that one plays out. As you know, with Forest Lake and the Rangers shifting over to Section 4, that is identical to how it was last cycle. It's the exact same 8 teams.
Right.
Yeah, so I'm
Morehead going to, I think there was like, I guess before I knew the sections, was kind of like trying to figure it out without just like geography wise. It was kind of like a question whether Morehead being so far out was going to be considered like north or west or how they were going to do it. And I think um, I like where Morehead landed. Like I want to see Feeney in like against top competition because I feel like what no matter like how good you are or whatever, the 6A people are always going to say, well, I mean, he's 5A, he's 4A, he's 3A, but now, I mean, that schedule is going to be no joke for Morehead, and the traveling's obviously going to add to the challenge in that. I'm very interested to see what they can do in Section 6 with, and these aren't regular season schedules, but for the most part, they're going to play these teams.
definitely, yeah. And so touch on the coach or the classes. I always say coach above class. Everyone likes to think, oh, any 6A team they're just the best 32, and
Right.
they would just steamroll the competition in lower classes. Not so sure if I took like Eastview or Park Cottage Grove or Roseville and put them in 5A that they'd go 8-0 and then blow through the state title.
Hmm.
It really does or like if you put Stewartville all the way up to 6A, I don't think they would just automatically go 0-8. So it really just kind of there's so many factors that go into that. But yeah, no, I'm really excited about Morehead playing in that West section because when I was kind of looking at okay, how our schedule is going to play out, I wanted to see Morehead play, Stillwater before Nick Kinsey transferred, but the other big one was Edina. I wanted to see that Mason West versus Jet Feeney matchup.
Yeah, that'll be a good one.
Um, but now that they're in the same section, I think that's going to be, I'd almost say it's locked in at this point.
Yeah.
Because for regular season schedules, the way they've usually done it is you're going to play about 6 teams in the regular season that are in your section. So just looking at it, I mean, Morehead's probably going to play 6 of those teams out of Section 6. So
We're gonna
pretty
get
good
good
chance.
matchups no matter what. Someone's gonna be
Exactly.
left off, but, um
Exactly. Yeah.
so let's talk about just some of the movement, and let's dive into the sections a little bit more. So we see on
Cool.
the left-hand side, Section 3, Prior Lake and Shakopee, are moving into Section 3. That's your section. How do you feel about that?
That is. We're excited. Prior Lake and Shaco have kind of jumped. They've always been on the cusp. Them and Park and Eastridge, they've always been on the cusp between sections. And so it's always kind of interesting because as Lakeville South, we've always been one of the southernmost teams. So it's like, okay, regardless of how sections shape up, we're always in Section 3. And so we usually see the same teams every single year, like your Farmingtons, your Lakeville Norths, your Rosemounts. That never changes. Whereas a team like Prior Lake Shakopee, a little more interesting for them because every 2 years or so, they could be playing all these teams out west, like EP, Edina, Minnetonka. And then another 2 years, they could be playing Lakeville North, South, and Rosemount. And I
Right.
mean, I think that's really cool for those kids in high school because it's like half your high school career, you get to experience all these teams, and then another half, it's like totally different teams. And just getting to see that variation, I think, is one of the coolest parts in 6A, and for the coaches too, because then we're not just playing the same
Same
however many
teams.
teams every single year.
Right. So the
Yeah,
the 2 teams that they replaced were Mayo
and
and
Burnsville.
Burnsville. Got you.
Yep,
Trying to do math, and I know viewers are probably trying to do the math too.
for sure.
Section 4 stays the same. Uh, not no movement there. Not just a little, but absolutely no movement.
Yep.
And I think that one's gonna shake out interesting. Is like I don't know when I look at that Mounds View, Sampson graduates that they still got talent and they made a deeper run than I honestly was expecting them to make
Yeah,
last
they
year.
gave Prior Lake a game. I mean,
Mhm.
they were hanging with Shakopee for the most part, and that
Yeah.
Shakopee defense was one of the best in the state. So,
Mhm.
and their defense was giving Shakopee's offense fits at times. I know Coach Moberg. I think played D line in college, but a defensive minded coach. And watching Mounds View's defense, they also play a 3-4, but they do a ton of pre snap shifts. It kind of sets them apart from a lot of other teams. Like you'll see their D line up, and then as the offense comes up, they all shift over a gap or a man. And just they do little details like that that messes with the opposing offense. So they definitely can make some noise. you can never count out Eastridge. We at Lakeville South know from the 2023 state quarterfinal, you never underestimate Coach Fritzy and the Raptors over there.
And
Force
Eastridge had
Lake,
a weird season. Like they went 500 and then they beat Lakeville North at the end of the season, and I was like, oh, okay.
oh, that was a
Just
shocker. Yeah. We
yeah.
were we were up at Eastview High School. That was week 7. And then at halftime, we're checking the scores around the league, and it was like 30 something to 7 Eastridge over North. I thought the score was flip-flopped. I'm like, this has to be an error. But just to be certain, on our way back from Eastview to South, we actually drove down Dodd past Lakeville North, and we saw the scoreboard, and it was like Eastridge 41, North, whatever they had, like 17. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
it's real. Yeah. But I mean, hey, great for the Raptors. I know by that point in the season, Lakeville North had a ton of injuries that really kind of derailed their season. They still were able to, I think they played Hopkins round 1, had a really good game against Champlin round 2, came out on top there. And then obviously that low scoring defensive slugfest down in Farmington against Anoka in the state quarterfinal. That was just like,
Heartbreaker.
yeah, oof, so rough. But yeah, no, I mean, and then Stillwater, like you said, with Nick Kinsey leaving, we're not sure what that's going to look like. I know
Kind of
Coach
just an
DeBoer.
unknown
Yeah, I
question.
mean, they always do a good job over there. Like, I think you touched on this in your interview with them last season. 2023, they had a really good receiving core. So there are a lot of 10 personnel, really spread it out and kind of a balanced attack. Whereas last year, they didn't quite have, they had mostly like younger receivers.
And I think they
Um,
came on towards like the end of the season, but like people know that when you have younger, not just younger, but also newer guys, like Nick wasn't throwing to most of any of those guys before like the previous season, and then you kind of get thrown in and it's going to take a little bit to gel. That's why we didn't see.
oh,
But I think I was looking like Stillwater was in most of the games. Most of their losses were 1-score games. So it wasn't like
oh yeah.
it wasn't the record didn't, tell how good or bad they were. I don't think, in my opinion.
Definitely, yeah, no, and like you said, they knew where their best kids were. They had a great running back, so like, hey, let's go back to our old school I formation. I want to say they probably implemented that over the summer, and they did good at that. I know in the homecoming game against Forest Lake, they had that play action right off the bat, and Kinsey bombed it. The ball was in the air for like 50 yards. It
Yeah,
was
it's a ball.
yeah, but yeah, they know how to get it done. White Bear is kind of an interesting one to me. I've heard they're redoing their offense this off season, so
Yeah, they got a new OC, and I think he's from Forest Lake. And what I've heard is it's going to be somewhat similar,
ooh,
and that usually happens. Like when somebody comes from one place and they're like in that system, they usually try to transfer it. Now, that being said, they could go do something, and that coach has something that is completely not Forest Lake related. But from what I've heard, it is going to be somewhat around the Forest Lake system. So the B Scout tree evolves in
ooh.
Section 4. We'll
Nice.
see if
To
that's
your
true.
arch rival, no less, just
Right.
down south of you. Wow.
Uh-huh. Yeah. That'll be interesting. Woodbury and Roseville have like struggled like they've been in. I guess I can just touch on last year, but teams that can really only go up. So, and I know Woodbury has some young players that I've been looking at.
Yeah,
So
Woodbury's
we'll
always the
see.
flip of a coin. I mean, they could be a 6 seed or they could be a 1 seed, and that's between any 2 given seasons. They could drastically change. Coach Hill, they do a great job over there. I think he's also another offensive-minded coach. But yeah, you never know with Woodbury. They surprise a lot of people. So
Getting back to Force Lake, just one more thing. It seems like from my perspective, they beat teams that they should, and then when they get to that challenge and they're like, okay, let's see if we're here, they just haven't got over the hump. Like Blaine, I think Lakeville North a couple years ago,
yep, that
like
was 2022. I remember that.
yeah, and they've had good first round. Like we've won, Force Lake has won first rounds, and that's not been the problem. But it's just like getting um getting past the first and second round that they they got it. And if they're going to, it's going to be this year. That I don't think Forest Lake has had a returning quarterback for a decent amount of time, and now Connor Johnson's returning for Forest Lake. They
Oh,
had one of the
nice.
best sophomore running backs last year in the state, fast. Um, And they do have a couple people like Howie Johnson,
Oh
obviously.
yeah.
We don't gotta touch on him, but there's a few people that are graduating, but for the most part, this is a seasoned team, and this is kinda like the year if it's gonna be, so, I can't wait to see what they do. You got any thoughts on them?
Definitely. So kind of the way I've been watching Forest Lake, Coach B has done an incredible job rebuilding that program. I mean, from your time when you were there, Forest Lake was kind of the bottom feeder of 6A, so to
Mhm.
speak. Didn't have a lot of success. Coach B comes in from 2022 onward, and they've just been, setting those building blocks and improving every year, kind of like Egan has been with Coach Johnson. Um, so what I think they could do to take the next, or I shouldn't say could do, but kind of that next step I think everyone's waiting for from Forest Lake is, can they win the section this year? Which I think is very doable considering all the pieces they're bringing back and kind of what's unfolded with some of the other teams. Eastridge and
Right.
Mounds View are always going to give them a fit, but I like their odds. Because if they do, they earn a 1 seed in the tournament. And I don't know if you saw Randy Shaver's podcast when he was talking about like the 6A tournament announcement this past season. But he was talking with Shakopee's head coach Ray Betton about the difference between being a 1 seed versus a 2 seed. And like you said, when Forest Lake was the 2 seed last year, well, second round of the playoffs, you have to play a 3 seed, and there's not really a whole lot of separation between those 2, 3s, like 2 and 3 seeds. Like if you look at the 2 seeds last year, it was Forest Lake. Shakopee was a 2 seed. Egan was a 2 seed, and then who's the other one I'm forgetting? Maple Grove, Anoka was the other one that we lost to. And then 3 seeds. I mean, the 3 seeds weren't too shabby either. You've got obviously Lakeville South was one. You had, was it Stillwater was a 3 seed out of Section 4? Um, yeah, it was it was just absolutely loaded.
Yeah,
So
the difference between 2 and 3, it is I think they're set up to get over the hump this year if it's gonna be any year. Forest Lake's also interesting, like, case study with the 5A and 6A, just
mhm,
for the people that are still, like, wondering about that because, like, it was the mid-2010s, Forest Lake had, like, 4 years of straight losing, and everybody wanted Forest Lake to go down, but enrollment-wise, we just couldn't. And
mhm,
then it got to we did get moved down, but we played, in 6A playoffs for, like, a little bit. I think my senior year was the last year that we played, like, a full 5A regular season schedule. We didn't have playoffs because it was the COVID year, but I think
mhm.
we would have played playoffs in 6A. But that's just, like, an interesting thing that can possibly happen with teams, and just kind of an interesting case study between 5A and 6A teams that are kind of like back and forth. But
Yeah, definitely. I mean, touching on that, I want to say it was 2 cycles ago in the 21 to 22. We talked about Brainerd and Coon Rapids earlier. They were 6A, but they wanted schedule relief, so they played 5A schedules in the regular season. But then come playoff time, now I think Coon Rapids, their first playoff game was up at Prior Lake, and Brainerd was at Stillwater. So, a bit of a difference playing like Sartell or Cambridge Santi, and then you have to go over to Stillwater in front
yeah,
of a crowd of
yeah,
like 4 or 5,000 people. So
right.
yeah,
Big jump, big
big,
jump.
big jump.
I know we talked about Section 5 a little bit already, but Rogers, Anoka going into it, um, an interesting one, especially with like the players that are leaving. I don't really know. Like, I think this is one you can go into it and be like, we'll see how this shakes out.
Definitely, yeah. Like I said, my first thought was, oh, Centennial has just like they're probably celebrating. They think they're gonna run away with this thing. But
Uh-huh.
like I said, as I started to look through it more, I'm like, well, sure, Anoka's losing a lot of talent, but Coach Wasserich knows how to run an offense. They'll be right back. Blaine is now the third biggest high school in terms of athletic enrollment in the states. They have plenty of bodies to spare. Coach Law always gets it done on offense. And then I almost completely forgot about Champlin Park. We were kind of talking about Woodbury being that kind of flip of a coin team any given year. They could be down or they could be up. Champlin Park, super underrated, and they are one of the most physical teams in 6A. We played them these past 2 years. They were our week 8 game. That was a non-section game. I think Coach Keenan actually played for Coach Grant back in the 90s at Eden Prairie High School. I want to say he might have won a state title or two. That's why they scrimmage each other, and he carries a lot of that physicality with him over to Champlin. And it shows in their defensive rating. Even though, saw win-wise, they may not win the most games, they always hold teams to pretty low scores. And, in that Section 5, it's almost all about offense. You have all these high scoring teams, minus Centennial, who wants to like slowly grind you down. But yeah, Champlin's, I think the incoming juniors, it was our current freshmen back in 2023 at Lakeville South. We played them week 8. Both of our teams were undefeated, and that freshman class at Champlin was one of the best I've ever seen. I mean, we barely beat them. I think I want to say it was like 22-18. And so those kids are going to be juniors. I think Champlin's probably going to play a lot of juniors this year. So we'll see what they do this year, but definitely the 2026 season, Champlin's going to be a scary team for sure.
Section 6, we talked about how I think it's easy to say this one's the most loaded, and that's not a knock on any other section, but I just think the talent in here speaks for itself. At least I think 4 of the quarterbacks at least are going to go D1. Like I know I don't know if Caleb Francois, he got offered as a running back to Iowa State, so I don't know if he's going to be. I know they have a junior quarterback.
Yep. From all that I've heard, talking with their coaches, they're probably going to have Francois play running back this year, and then they're going to have their junior quarterback be the actual quarterback. They might even get some dual quarterback stuff going. So now you have to worry about an athlete at running back that can also throw the ball, and you have a quarterback that can also pass or run the ball. So,
that's interesting because I was thinking, is that going to be the case? Because the Francois quarterback sweeps, it was just like 4th grade football. Like I went to a couple Minnetonka games and we saw them like on the biggest stage, just unstoppable. It's just like sweep left.
Yeah, against Anoka, they just kept running quarterback GH counter into the boundary. I want to say they like that specific play call, like 15-16 GH counter. They probably ran it like 60 out of their 70 plays, and you can see it. They did all the fake that way. The guard and the H back pull into the boundary guard, and obviously Minnetonka, huge lineman. Great kick out block. H-back leads up, takes either a safety or an inside linebacker, and then Francois just follows. And obviously, super strong kid, great runner. It's going to take quite a few boys to bring him down. So
right,
definitely.
Minnetonka, Edina. I think they're going to be up there. I would say they had a disappointing season last year, just like based on the expectation of coming off state runner-up. Expected just a little bit more. Like they had a few disappointing. I know they got worked by Shakopee that I was expecting to be more of like a really good game, and they kind of just got flattened. But I don't expect them to take a step back at all, especially given their roster.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, it's always hard to say because, we can say like, hey, this is the defending state champ, like, or the defending or state runner up in the case of like Centennial Edina. But you never know. Like Centennial graduated a ton of seniors. They lose Dalen Cummings, you lose Maverick Harper, Marcus Whiting, like those kids that have been starting since I want to say their sophomore years. I was actually watching I don't know if it was regular season or playoff game, but it was a 2022 matchup between Centennial and Minnetonka at Centennial. And all those kids were playing. They're like, oh, Marcus Whiting with the TFL. Here's Maverick Harper up the middle. Dalen Cummings with the pass. I'm like, wow. So, definitely tons of experience with those kids on varsity. Talking about the teams and where they're going to be and, defending state champions per se, Maple Grove is one of the biggest elephants in the room for me in all of 6A because, you lose a ton of talent. I mean, how many D1 kids graduated from there this past year?
Yeah, some linemen, a tight end, a running back. They got people to replace them, but still, that whole like replacing thing, it's not just like it's not as easy as just one for one. Like, okay, easy. Like, I think Dozier is their like running back. He was kind of like the second fiddle to Langama, and like he's good, but it's like Langama was so good that's like a big shoe to fill in, and he was obviously a big part of their offense. But not just that, but like Maple Grove had one of the most dominant O lines in like tight end cores, just like physical. Like I was at Bemidji State's like team camp early on in the season. I think it was like late July last season, and just like you could see, I mean, they were going against Shakopee, they were going against Force. Like it wasn't like there was just like mediocre teams up there, but they were just like working them, and you could tell it's like these guys are going to be close to unstoppable. And man, they were. That was right. Like we saw that. But yeah,
And I mean, they still kept proving it 'cause, the whole like talk about Maple Grove is, and kind of with all those Section 5 teams the past 2 years, is weeks 1 through 7, they play each other. And it's like, well, what does it really say about Maple Grove that they beat Coon Rapids or Osseo by 50 points?
Right.
And I think, like we said, that first true test for Maple Grove was always that week 8 matchup with Minnetonka, and they won both years in a row. Really had to come back, and I don't think they had Chuck Langama for either of those matchups in 23 or 24 in week 8.
Hmm. Yep.
So obviously they plenty of kids to pull back up. If a kid gets hurt, they got plenty of bodies and they get it done over there. But then in the postseason, you think about the gauntlet they had to run through. I mean, they played Eden Prairie round 2, Edina round 3, Shakopee in the state semis, and then taking on Minnetonka. So I mean, that's the Section 6 gauntlet right there, and they got it done, one right after the other.
Yeah. Wyzetta, I think, is a quarterback transfer from Maple Grove. I think
I heard
Hiccup
about that.
or something like that. So I think they're gonna have a new look at quarterback. Um, Hopkins and STMA are kind of like the ones that are like, and I guess if we're going by last year's standards, EP was down too.
Mhm.
But who knows with them? They got the stuff to kind of be a wild card. But Hopkins, after not winning a game in I don't know how many years, it was getting close to Forest Lakes. I'll tell you that. I
It
was
was
like, ooh, they're
oh,
giving the Forest
yeah,
Lake a
it
run for
was
their money.
I wanna say the last game they won was 2020, and it was a 5A team, and then they didn't win a single game in the 21, 22, or 23 seasons. Obviously, you're gonna lose week 1 to Shakopee. I kinda covered that game on my stream. Shakopee was doing a lot of things right. Hopkins had some good ideas, just, execution they could have cleaned up, but then, they come back and they win 3 games in the Maroon section. I mean, that's just awesome for that program. You can tell that, Coach Chauncey's really doing a lot to rebuild them over there, and I think Hopkins is definitely trending in the right direction. And
Yeah, I
we all
mean,
want to see that. No one wants to see a team go like 0-8 and their football program just shrinks and disappears over time because no one wants to be
right.
a part of it. So yeah, no, I think he's doing a great job, and Hopkins will definitely be rising in the next few years. They got plenty of athletes to work
Yeah,
with.
I was gonna say they have athletes. It's just like the O line that, or just like the size, whether it's on offense or defense, that especially being in the just 6A, kind of like you're not gonna run against many teams that don't have size, and I think that's kind of where they kind of fell with the teams that they could kind of like have a chance. I think they won and they got on a, because looking at their schedule last year, it's like, oh, I could see Hopkins getting on a little bit of a run here after they got their first one, and they did a good job. STMA leaving. You said they left Section 5, correct?
Yes. So STMA has always, in the regular season and past years before this current cycle, they've kind of bounced between playing in like the Lake Conference with your Edina, Eden Prairie, Maple Grove, Minnetonka, and all them. But then they would always play playoffs in Section 5. And, it's always hard to see the team because it's like, well, how do they stack up with like your Anoka, Blaine, Centennial, Champlin, all these teams that they haven't played in the regular season? And I know when we went to this new kind of scheduling format in 2023, that was something a lot of the 6A coaches brought up is, hey, if we want to seed teams properly, we have to see them in the regular season. And then any maroon teams that wanted relief would be automatic, like bottom seed placements. So, like, I know this last year in Section 3, we had Burnsville and Eastview. So they were like designated as the 7th and 8th seed. But yeah, so STMA, I don't want to say they're my biggest loser of this, but you go from getting to play in Section 5, now you're potentially
To
looking
get
at
right.
playing a lot of those Section 6 teams in the regular season. And STMA probably underrated defensive team. Coach Essler always has had a really strong defense. I know last year was kind of an off year. They switched from their traditional 4-3 to a 3-4 look. Once they kind of get the hang of it and really feel that scheme out, I think they'll be right back there having a tough defense. Kind of the transformation of their offense has been interesting. If you look back even just 2 years ago, they were a lot kind of like Maple Grove, a lot of I formation, unbalanced, heavy eyes, 22 personnel, but they're starting to spread it out more these last few years. You're seeing more of like stretch out of 11 personnel. They still do some like pistol eye stuff, but it's mostly goal line, kind of few and far between. But yeah, it's definitely going to be see how they stack up with like an Eden Prairie, a Minnetonka, and a Edina.
Yeah, I don't think it's a stretch to say that they were one of the losers of the section alignment. Just you can see the clear kind of like upper the jump up that it is from Section 5 and Section 6. This is coming in the spring. So, like, who knows where these teams are going to be. But just, like, the only thing we can go off right now is on paper. Like, a lot of these teams are going to have juniors coming up that we probably, like, we can't watch sophomore games. So we don't know, like, all
Exactly.
that's going on. But just, like, on paper from what we've seen, yeah, that's gonna be definitely a jump up, but we'll see how they do. I just want to go to your screen to see how far Moorhead is away, because just talking about it, I was like, is this? I think I have to remove this and then go
There we
here.
go. Yep.
Yeah,
So that's the map of 6A, just looking at the Twin Cities. Let's see how many times we have to click out in order to see Moorhead. 1, 2. There we go. So third time's a charm. So as you see, you have 31 teams clustered all around the Twin Cities. And then 2.5 hours away from St. Michael Albertville is Moorhead High School, right on the border up there. Yeah, I mean, that's going to be a haul. And you want to talk about like a home field advantage. I mean, even St. Michael Albertville, suppose they match up with Moorhead in the regular season. You're talking about getting your kids out of school early, having to bus them 3 hours there, then another 3 hours back. Game might not end until 9, 10 o'clock. You're not getting home until midnight at the earliest. So I guess we'll see how they handle a lot of those logistics, especially if Moorhead has to play a Thursday night game. But
Oof.
Moorhead's going to have a huge home field advantage, especially over those tough teams. So
Thursday night games might be tough. Off topic, but kind of on topic. You mentioned Thursday night games. I heard from somebody, just in terms of like scheduling, like for ref shortage reasons or whatever, that like a team has to have either one Thursday or one Saturday game. Is that factual?
I don't know about one Saturday game. I think it's different for the lower classes. So for 6A, the way they did Thursday games for the most part is at the very week one, they always would highlight like, okay, who are our two biggest matchups? We'll have those on Friday night. Like I know in the 2023 season, Lakeville South versus Wyzetta was the highlight matchup. So that got put on Friday, and then the rest of the league played Thursday for 6A. So that usually follows that format. But then as far as the regular season goes, they don't want you to be able to see another team in your section on the same week. So like say Lakeville South plays Friday night, we're playing Egan. And then Thursday, Lakeville North played Farmington. We play Lakeville North the next week, so they come and watch our game the next day. So they would take all the teams in the same section and have them all play on that Thursday. So like I want to say week 4 was the week that our section all played Thursday. Like we were at Egan. I think Mayo was hosting Rosemount, and then Farmington and Lakeville North played. And so the state high school league does that on purpose so that we can't go to each other's games, which I think is a great idea, though, because then that keeps it fair for all the teams in your section.
Okay, that's interesting. I didn't know that. As far as like from a viewer perspective, like I wish high school, and I get that you can't just because of the way it's set up, but like having games go at the same time is kind of like the crappy part about it, just because um you can only watch like during the playoffs. I tried to have like 4 5 games going, but during the regular season I go 2 games to record. And I guess that section thing does throw a little bit. I want to see, and I get it, I'm throwing out ideas for the uppers to think about, but just like trying to tweak it to make it a better viewing experience. Like I feel like there's some things that, although it gives coaches and like teams a little bit of a better chance, like if it's really like one day of scouting or whatever, but I get that, but making like the Thursday matchups maybe like bigger matchups, I guess, that
Mm-hmm.
way, because there's less teams playing on Thursday. Um, not to dog on any teams, but just like a Thursday game when it's a nobody playing and nobody, no matter who it is, like that's not for like viewership. That's not what people really like want to see, if that makes sense. So I guess just that's a little bit of my opinion of like how can we try to make this a better viewer, easier to consume for like fans and players, because I'm sure players would watch other people's games, but they all play at the pretty much the same time. And there's Like I feel like the Saturday night slot, although and I know there's a couple games during the season, but I feel like that could be used a decent amount to get a little bit more viewership to games. Like I feel like a Saturday night game with two big time Minnesota teams, like who wouldn't want to go to that? I don't care like if you're a part of that school or not. And I guess the whole like competitive coaching thing comes up to have people like watching the game, but I guess I don't really think about that. I'm kind of just thinking, how can we up the product of Minnesota high school football? That was one idea that I had to just make it a little bit better for viewing for fans.
Definitely, yeah. And I don't know if anyone's ever considered that viewpoint. That's why it's always nice to talk about it because you get, like you said, as a viewer, you're kind of giving your perspective and everything. And obviously, that's going to be different from, say, like the school district, the coach, the players. So it's always nice to just kind of hear all those different perspectives and kind of bring ideas forward on what works best for everyone. Because I know, like we talked about, when you get those like staggered matchups, like I'll use the 6A state tournament for example. Like, I want to say this past year, I know like Minnetonka played whoever it was. I think it was Blaine in the state quarterfinal up in Osseo, and that was a Thursday game. And then Friday, Minnetonka already won. They get an extra day of rest, and then they can actually go down to Farmington and see who they're going to play next. You can scout Lakeville North, you can scout Anoka. So you get not only an extra day of preparation, but you can physically go and watch your next opponent play, whichever team it may end up being. I want to say you probably got that like in the state final last year. Like obviously, or state semifinal 23 season, we lost the Centennial on a Thursday night, 20-13. And then the next night, Eden Prairie and Edina play each other. And, I'm sure plenty of Centennial Cougar football players were probably in the stands watching there. So, I guess it depends on if they really
How
see that.
much does that actually give you an advantage? I mean, I as a player and as a coach, like I do some coaching like on the side. There's only like so much that can actually do. I don't know how much that's not gonna swing a game, and at least in my opinion.
So it all kinds of depends. It's more so that extra day of rest for the players to recover. As you know, football is an incredibly physically demanding sport. And when you
Mhm.
get that one extra day of rest for your kids' bodies to recover, it could make all the world of difference, especially when you're talking about like deep into the state tournament. Teams are only the teams that belong in the state tournament have made it there. No one made it there by fluke. So,
I got you.
yeah.
Another point, kind of on this topic. I know we're straying away a little bit, but like the high school tournament, state tournament
Mhm.
schedule, I feel like was like super rough. Like, and I get that's how it's always been. Like, it's kind of like the normal of having games during like the middle of weekdays. But it's like I want to watch, but like why can't I? And I get that there's like facility like issues of like we play US Bank, and I don't know what like the home field for the Vikings was, but like I don't know. Let's let's try to like maximize viewing, especially with these state tournaments. Like these lower class people only get so much recognition, and then putting them at 11 a.m. or like 9 a.m. on a Thursday, nobody's gonna watch that. That's not a part of their school or like maybe college scouts, but like it's one of the things where like the name recognition for it's really only for like the big time teams that are 5A and 6A because those and I get those are at prime time spots, but I feel like there's a little bit of maneuvering that can like try to be done at least um to get those athletes a little bit more out there. That was just
Mhm.
one of the takeaways. And then playoffs, um, maybe you talked about Thursday and Fridays, and I know that's like the stereotypical day, but like getting them on the same day at a different like time slot, maybe like a Saturday, and having them like I would like it as a viewer if I don't were the semifinal games or like I guess section games. Those were pretty much played it all like the same time because I remember having like multiple screens up, just like staggering them throughout the day and not having a 7 p.m. time slot for all of them. I don't know. That's just one of the things in me like really digging in and trying to follow high school football in Minnesota. Just a little bit got on my nerves. It was like it's really hard to follow when you got so many teams going at once. And I get it. It's kind of a reality of high school football, but I feel like there's a little bit better of a way that can be done. And I don't know how it can be done, but I'm sure at least just kicking around the tires to see if something can be done would be worth it for the players.
Yeah, for sure. And it's actually so speaking of sections, it's actually different for 6A compared to everybody else. So for 6A, for sections, it's set that you have the 2 weeks after the season. Section playoffs have to be completed by the end of that second week. And that's easy for us at 6A. It's just the first two rounds of the playoffs. We get our whole week and then we play Thursday or
That's
Friday
why,
and then we're
because
done.
they played. What was it? I think it was a Tuesday and a Saturday game. Was a lot
Yep.
of teams playing, and I get what you're saying about like the whole like body thing, but it is high school football is different than college football, and
Oh
like
yeah.
like it's definitely a lot less. It's not less physical, but it's just like less intense, right? So I feel like in terms of just like scheduling wise, I think it would be like I don't think if you talk to those teams and be like, were you not ready to go, or was your body like um were you not up to 100% just based on like tread on the tires? I feel like high school athletes they can rebound really quick and they can go through stuff and be like, I'm ready to go like the next day. And I get like in playing football, you have those days where you're like, oh man. But I don't know. That again, that's another interesting thing because I saw that too, and I didn't know why that it was such a tight turnaround, but it shows that it can be done. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely. No, and like you said, with that tight turnaround, you get that especially like at the lower classes because generally the teams they play in their sections, they all see in the regular season. Like when I was over at Jefferson, we would play week 8 would be MEAU, you'd play on a Wednesday. And then the following Tuesday, you go back and we'd play like Chanhassen or Chaska, whatever the higher seed was. And you already kind of know what they do because it's a team you've already seen in the regular season. So yeah, like you said, you're right. I don't know if you need as much preparation because it's an opponent you've seen. You just kind of measure what they've really changed since the last time they played you, and you get another look at them. And sometimes those matchups can flip flop. We brought up Alexandria and Moorhead earlier, how Moorhead got the better of them in the regular season, and then come postseason, Alexandria got back at Moorhead. So it all kind of depends. And like you said, there's a ton of variables that go into it. Like at Lakeville South, we're pretty good with recovery. We've got one of the best strength and conditioning programs in the whole state. Like we've won the last 5 Olympic weightlifting state titles in a row. We're super fortunate to have that, but not every school may have access to that same kind of rebuilding and like strength and conditioning process in order to get your kids rehabilitated and then ready for the next game. So I think the state high school league is probably just trying to be equitable for those teams that maybe don't have access to as many of those resources or strength and conditioning that other schools do.
All right.
But no, I
Prime
definitely
time
hear what you're
games,
saying.
prime time slots, I feel like I don't know. The NFL does it, college football does it. It's about time it comes to high school. I think it just maximizing viewership would be fine. But I'll get off my soapbox and we'll start talking about 5A. That we covered 6A for the most part.
Yeah, no, and I definitely hear you saying that because I mean, considering how many games you would have to drive around to just for you to get your coverage on a weekly basis, like I props to you for doing all that, Caleb. I mean, that's got to be an absolute haul.
Hey, well, I want to do more. So if we get some more games at different times, I'll be at more. And I think we should have more like because okay, what one more thing, just because you said that. So I could maximize like minimum of 3 games because I can only get to one Thursday, one Friday, and one Saturday game because the Saturday games are kind of out there. There's some Saturday games that all play at the same time slot, which I can only get one of those. I have to pick which one. And players love coming out and getting video of their stuff, but it's tough to pick and be like, well, there's however many high schools in the league, but I can only get to 3 games in one week, and that's like 24 games in a regular season, and then I don't even get allowed to go to playoff games to record just because it's official media.
Yep.
So it's just like that that time it's important. But yeah, so 5A changed a little bit in the fact that, those 6A teams are going down. Do you have I didn't have a graphic for 5A, but
All
maybe
good.
we can.
I got the 5A map pulled up if you want to take a
Okay.
look at that. So this is 5A.
And I think I was listening to I forgot to plug your YouTube. I'll put it in like probably before. But if you're I don't know, your live stream that you had was your first one. You did a really good job. It was really insightful. I was listening to the whole thing. A part of that you mentioned, like the 5A, there's 48 teams that are after the 32 that are usually the 5A. That's kind of how it works. And then the next 48 is class 4A. And that's just like in a general sense of how it works. But then once we get into the classes and sections coming out, that 48 can mold into a lower amount of teams if that's really what the class needs. Uh,
Yep, you're
I guess
absolutely correct.
I
Yeah.
set it up on a tee. Go ahead and hit the home run because I know you will.
Sounds good. Yeah. So traditionally 6A is the 32 biggest schools. And like you said, sometimes you have a team that opts down and another one that opts up, like in the case of Coon Rapids, or I know a few years ago, Totino Grace, enrollment about 4A, they would opt up to 6A. And then, another team that would be top 32 gets bumped down to 5A. But yeah, and that's why it's always so hard. We can always get an idea of what 6A is because it's just okay, top 32 teams, but then it's never quite the next 48 and the next 48 after that for 5A and 4A. Like just looking at the map here, there's only 43 teams that are going to be in 5A this year instead of 48. And then just really fast, I'll flip to 4A here. They've got 49 teams. So obviously, yeah, it's not quite as even, but it all kind of just depends on where teams land. I think I touched on this earlier. Like I always say, coaching before class, just because you're moving up or down a class doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have a better or worse experience. Like Moorhead's probably going to do just as good in 6A as they did in 5A. Mayo might be better in 5A than they were in 6A. Coach Holcomb is absolute offensive mastermind. He was absolutely scoring points at will against 6A teams. And I'm sure he'll do the same at 5A. But take like Richfield. Suppose you put Richfield down to 3A in the last cycle instead of 4A. Well, what if they have to go play like a Stewartville or a Dassel Cokato? Are they going to have an easier time just because they're in 3A? Well, maybe, maybe not. You never know. So it honestly just comes down to who you play. There's great coaches and great programs at every level.
And you saying that I know when I was trying to get information out early, like on class realignments and talking to people like all over and just trying to get as much info. And then I released like the 6A, what we think 6A is going to be. Um, it was I had a couple people message me and be like, "Where's the lower classes?" And I was like, "Well, I'm trying my best, but even when you get to 5A, we can see how much that it changes because based off like what I was searching for 48 teams, 48 teams, 48 teams, and I didn't want to put out 48 teams and have people see it and be like, "Oh, I didn't want to give out false information in a sense." So that kind of just shows how much that the classes can shift from like what we think or at least what we're told it's going to be. That's why I wasn't able to get any info out. I kind of chose not to just because it's like,
Yeah.
I don't
And
know.
like you said, I mean, that info is almost impossible to get unless you're talking to all like however many thousand athletic directors there are in the state of Minnesota talking with the state
Right.
high school league. So yeah, like we said, 6A is pretty much the only one that we can really get a grip of, whereas the rest we just kind of have to wait and see. I mean, sure, you're gonna have your teams that are like in the middle of a class, like your Bloomington Jeffersons are probably always gonna be 5A, or like say your Elk River, they're not too big.
Hmm.
Or like Spring Lake Park is a good one, for example. Like they're a pretty big 5A school, but they're kind of like landlocked. There's not a lot of room for their community to expand. So it's like over here you got Mounds View, Shoreview, Blaine, and like the Centennial cities are above you. Out west, you start to get like Champlin and Brooklyn Park and all that. So they're just really kind of landlocked. And you never really know. Like I said, I just kind of predicted Rogers, Andover, and Moorhead because I know that those communities were all growing. But you never know with all the other teams. Like Stewartville, maybe all of a sudden gets like a couple thousand people that move in out of nowhere, and all of a sudden they get bumped up to 5A in a few
Hmm.
years. It all
Yeah.
kind of depends, but
Was there any just interesting developments in 5A or 4A that are worth taking a look at?
Definitely. So two of my biggest winners in 5A, and we touched on this a little bit when we talked about teams that came up to 6A. Alexandria out here no longer has to worry about playing Moorhead in the section finals. Um, and same thing with Elk River down here. They don't have to worry about a shootout with Andover anymore because you're not going to play Andover anymore. But I think one of the interesting things about 5A is, and I don't know if we talked about this on sections. So if you look at 6A, there's only 4 sections in 6A, and it's just all 32
Oh,
teams. And
that was a good. Here, hold on. I want to test my knowledge because I listened to you. So
all
the
right,
1, 2, 7, and 8 are kind of like out of the metro, and
you got
then
it.
the 3, 4, 5, and 6 are all like near and around the metro.
You got it. So if I'm going to put all the classes on here, it's going to look like an absolute blob. But if you look at kind of the color distribution, you're spot on. Section 7 is usually northeastern Minnesota. Section 1 is southeastern. 2 is generally southwest. And then 8 is northwest. So that's generally the format it follows. Obviously, you get a little bit of crossover depending on what class the teams are in. Like, for
Right.
example, if you look at the spread of 9-player teams versus the spread of 5A teams, you kind of get some of that crossover in between sections just because of where the teams are. There's not a lot of 9-man
Mhm.
teams around the Twin Cities, so a little
Yep.
bit more spread out. But
Me thinking as an outsider, not really knowing like a whole ton about like sections and like alignments. I didn't know, like I've heard I've heard sections before, and I think that's a term that most people have heard before, but um, I've never heard of like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Like I don't think
mhm,
that's like big public knowledge that kind of like your average person would know. So there's 8 sections for every class except 6A. That's
correct.
correct. So there's only
Spot on.
4, and it's 3, 4, 5, and 6. There's no 1, 2. Because I was looking at it and I was like, why do they make this so confusing? Sections, why does 6A start at 3? That just makes no sense, just in terms of my brain, because I don't know anything about it. But then
Definitely.
once you dig into it, it does make sense, even though if you're an outsider and know nothing about it, it's like, why does it start at 3? That doesn't make any sense.
Exactly, yeah. And I mean, like with 6A, it's never perfect. Like we said, there's always, at least the last 3 cycles, there have always been an outsider. Like this is the map from this coming season. You got Moorhead all the way out there. If I go back to 2023, well, and we switch to 6A, sure, you have all these teams around the metro, but then hello, Rochester, Mayo, there you are. And then even if you want to go back a year before that, 2022, switch over to 6A, you got Brainerd all the way up there. So even though like the majority of teams are always centered around the metro area, because that's where all the biggest schools are, the last few cycles we've always had that one team that's kind of
Outsider.
outlying. So, but that's why 6A has always been those sections inside the Twin Cities, because I mean, like we said, when you have 31 out of 32 teams all clustered right there, and then only one outlier, they're going to use the Twin Cities. And that's kind of for all the classes. If I just zoom out, when you look at the color distribution, you can kind of see that the metro is the center of all that color. And then it kind of gets a little bit more like with its own color as you get further out from the metro area. So yeah, that's pretty much the and I mean you could say it's the center of the state of Minnesota, right? It's where the capital
Right.
is, it's where biggest population center is.
Yep.
So that, yeah, so we were talking about 5A. So yeah, one of those interesting differences between 6A and the rest of the classes is that like we said, only one team out of these 8 sections for 5A and below make the state tournaments. If I zoom in on section 3 here, this is 5A section 3. So you've got now Burnsville, who dropped down to 5A, Apple Valley, Two Rivers, St. Thomas Academy, and Hastings. So what they'll do is at the end of the regular season, the coaches in that section will come together over email and they will all submit, like I want to say they all submit a ranking of 1 through 5 of the teams. And then that is sent to the state high school league. And then that's how they determine the seedings for sections. So like I don't know if anyone watched we were talking about Randy Shaver's podcast. He always does a great job doing the 6A tournament reveal. But Coach Benton was a bit fired up this past time because, we had 7-1 Shakopee in 2024 was given the 2 seed. Meanwhile, 6-2 Minnetonka got the 1 seed. And for anyone kind of wondering about that, that's all voted on by the coaches. So those 8 coaches from Section 6 all voted on what they thought the seedings 1 through 8 should be of those teams, with the exception of Buffalo and Hopkins. Since they requested schedule relief, they were relegated to the 7th and 8th seed. But
So that's how you got Mounds View as I think they were 1. And I think that was like surprising for some people, like, oh, but so that seating is all, and I knew coaches were involved somewhat, but I didn't know it was like pure, just like all the coaches, and then it's just like an average, I guess, of what the results are. But you kind of took the words right out of my mouth. I was gonna talk about like the lower classes, and it's only one. So one section winner, that is the person that advances to state, right?
Correct.
And what is that? The state quarters? Yeah.
Yep. So it'll
like
be the state quarters,
about
and then
okay.
the bracket that they draw for the state quarters. They have 4 teams. So like sections 7, 8, and then 6 over here and 4. They'd consider the North 4 seeds, and then they have the South 4 seeds in these sections 1 to 3 and 5. And then they would just draw a random tournament bracket, and then they just plug in those teams wherever they draw that random bracket from.
Hold on. Say that again. So, okay. So the section winners, let's just say we're doing 5A. Okay.
All right. Here, let me turn that really fast. There, now I can make sure I can hear you.
So we're doing 5A,
mm-hmm.
and there's 8 sections. Those 8 winners come out. Okay. Then they technically like reseed, basically, is what you're saying?
Yes. So if you want, we can do a hypothetical. So like section 8, you got Bemidji, Brainerd, Sartell, and I want to say that's Sauk Rapids, Rice, and then Alexandria. Which of those 5 teams you think would come out of that section? One team to win all of them.
We'll say Alexandria.
All right. So you got Alexandria up there. Section 7, do you think that anyone like Monticello, Cambridge Ascenti, St. Francis, or Duluth East, do you think any of them are going to beat Elk River in a section tournament?
Nope.
All right. So there's 2 of your state winners. So you've got Alexandria going to state, Elk River, and they do that same process for all these other teams. Okay. They just take those 8 winners from each of the section, and then they're all assigned north or south. So if I
that was like okay, because I saw like 1N or like that in the brackets that I was trying to look at.
Yep. So when you look at like the 5A and below brackets, it'll say S or N. So like these are the 4 north brackets. So they'll take each of those winners and they'll seed those teams. Like, okay, who's the best of these 4? They're north 1, and so on and so forth going down.
So it's always going to be north south, or is that wrong?
Generally, yes. They always try to match up a north and a south against each other in the first round.
And is that what the championship game is going to be?
Not always. You could have 2 teams from the north. Like, for example, if I just pull out sections 7 and 8, obviously both those sections are in the north, and who was our 5A title game between last year?
Gotcha. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
So
yeah. I was wondering if that was like, because the point of the championship game is to get 2 of the best teams to play each other, and I was like, okay, well that shouldn't be dependent on north and south. Just because the south is the south doesn't mean that if they have a lesser team than 2 teams in the north, they shouldn't just get a championship like bid. That was kind of like my Moorhead Alexandria thing of like, I guess you see that more in sections, but in state it gets corrected out.
Yeah, and even still, that's to an extent. Like, I'll highlight section 2 down here. You think back to the 2023 season. I mean, we had 2 powerhouses coming out of here. You got Mankato West down here. Then obviously you had that's Chaska, Chanhassen running the table with Maxwell Woods, Sam Macy. They just had that incredible class go through.
Yep.
But like we said, they're both in section 2 right here. So that means only one of those 2 teams gets to make it to the final state tournament. Meanwhile, like we said, up here, not that an Alexandria or Elk River aren't deserving, but one of those 2 teams is going to get in over a Mankato West team that loses in the section final to Chanhassen.
Right.
Or like, what's another section? So section 5, this is one that I actually looked at right away because I used to coach at Bloomington Jefferson. It's only these 5 teams So you have St. Louis Park, Minneapolis Southwest, Washburn, Bloomington Jefferson, and Bloomington Kennedy behind them here. One of those 5 teams is guaranteed to make the state tournament in 2025 and 2026. And like we said,
No matter what the
whichever
record,
team
basically.
wins that section is going to make the state tournament over the loser of like a Mankato West versus Chanhassen. Because obviously we want to see parity, and I think you hit the nail on the head. You want to see the best 8 teams in state. But then again, at the same time, like I want to say this past season, like I'll look at section, section 4 over here. Like you have St. Paul Central, CDH, Highland Park. I want to say Humboldt Harding Co-op is there, Matamidi. I don't think that section did too hot last year. I know Cretin-Durham Hall won it, but I think they were only like 4-4 overall. And like you said, a 4-4 Cretin-Durham Hall team gets to be in the state tournament. Meanwhile, like a 6-2 Mankato West does not. Or I know Andover and Elk River. Andover was 6-2, missed the state tournament because only Andover or Elk River could go to the state tournament. And you touched on the big one earlier, Alexandria versus Moorhead. Alexandria upset an 8-0 Moorhead team. So an 8-0 Moorhead team missed out on the state tournament. Meanwhile, like you said, a 4-4 Cretin-Durham Hall team gets in. And, records don't always mean everything. We're talking about high school kids. Coaching staffs are completely different. Yep. Who you play is different. All you can really control is what the next game ahead of you is and do what you can to win that game. So, I don't know. I mean, I guess they could look at doing a big tournament like 6A does, but then you're talking about like 6A has to be 32 teams. And as we kind of saw, 5A and the classes below are kind of fluid. Those numbers move around. And it'd be incredibly difficult to say like, hey, we're just going to have a 48 team tournament and these 48 teams are locked into 5A. So
gotcha.
I really don't know what kind of the solution to that would be.
Interesting. Okay. As far as 5A, is that kind of all you got? I know the last thing I want to touch on is the Stewartville thing, but if you got anything else on 5A that
I mean, I can kind of do something that leads into the whole Stewartville thing off of. So we were talking about like those sections like 1, 2, and 3 with 7, 8, and 3. So we were talking about how like St. Thomas Academy, Elk River, and Alexandria may not have all that much competition going into the state tournament. Meanwhile, if you look at sections 1 and 2 down here, for section 2, we mentioned Chanhassen and Mankato West. Mankato East had a great season last year. You can never count the Cougars out. Chaska won state in 2019. I know they haven't seen as much success recently, but they're still dangerous. Waconia had Max McAnally. They had a really good team a few years ago. And like we said, only one of those 5 teams can make state. And then you come over here to section 1. Well, it's Century, but you get Rochester Mayo, Coach Holcomb coming in. And remember, they just got done playing 2 years of 6A football. So those kids are locked in, and their varsity team's going to be scary next year.
Yep.
But then they're going to have to compete with like Owatonna and Rochester John Marshall. And again, only one of those teams is going to be able to make it to the state tournament. So that is the kind of the one downside of the sections, is that they're all more so based on geography rather than maybe how well the teams could perform in any given regular season. Right. But I still think we generally end up with some of the best teams in state. Yeah. Like I don't think anyone would deny that Elk River Alexandria was a deserving state title game last year.
Right. Yeah. And I'm not trying to the whole it's not broken. I'm just trying to find ways to make it better if there is a way. But I mean, the reality is it would be really tough. And I think that's why they have this system right now. I'm not saying it's going to stay this though for the rest of time, but this is the system that they've come up with to work the best. And they've factored in all the logistics and stuff like that. But yeah, like you said, the teams that are making it out, it's not like they aren't deserving. Most definitely.
Definitely, yeah. It's just like you said, some may have harder paths than others. And speaking of harder paths than others, let's go take a look at 4A. So I think we kind of mentioned this earlier. We've talked about this team a few times. Who's the big team that made the jump from 3A to 4A? Stewartville, exactly. And I don't think Stewartville has lost a game these last 2 seasons when they were in 3A, right? I want to say they were 26-0.
Running over everybody.
I mean, that's just incredible. Hats off to that. That's just an incredible achievement for the entire community there and the coaching staff and the kids. But so you see, you got Stewartville down here, but they're in an incredibly tough section because you've got Byron, who's made it to state the last few years. You got Cass and Manorville, who I think they were in the state final in 2022 and had a decently close game with Hutchinson. I don't know much about Austin Faribault. Winona obviously was always been historically good. They won state almost like 2016, 2017. They were always around. But again, you look at those four teams right there, like a Winona, a Stewartville, a Byron, and a Caston Manorville. Only one of those teams will make it to the state tournament, and three of them will be eliminated by the second week of the playoffs in section play.
Just crazy.
Yeah, I know. As soon as I saw that section, and like we said, if we just zoom out a little bit, you can kind of see the colors are based the same. You've got 3, 4, 5, and 6 all centered around the Twin Cities. And then obviously you've got 7, 8, 1, and 2 kind of on the outskirts around the state of Minnesota.
All right, on this topic, I have an idea pop up. I'm kind of the idea guy right now. Just
all right, lay it on.
Ideas. So one of the games that I went to, I guess I went to 2 games that were cross-class matchups. So I think the first one I went to was a Stewartville against Kassan Mantorville. And at that time, they were in different classes. And then the next one I went to was Princeton, Dassel Cokato. And that was also a cross-class. Yeah, I'm saying that
right.
Yeah,
Dassel Cokato 3A, Princeton 4A.
So and I guess you can only speak to what you know, but is there, like, how do these instances of, like, 2 teams from different classes match up with each other? How does that even work?
Yeah, so when I first started coaching at Jefferson in 2018, it was actually really common to see teams kind of play cross-class. It's never as common in 6A unless you're looking for schedule relief, but like 5A and 4A, we'd play teams like that all the time. Like my first year, we obviously got Chan, Chaska, Waconia, all 5A teams. But then you play Orono, Benilde, St. Margaret, 4A at the time. And then actually Robbinsdale Armstrong was 6A at the time. So, my very first season, we're playing team, even though we're a 5A school, we're playing 4A, 5A, and 6A. I want to say it was around 2023, this most recent cycle, that we really started to see sections and districts focus more on staying within one's class. And again, that's just kind of so you can seed the teams correctly. Because, take Duluth East, for example. They're up here in the city of Duluth. The closest team to them is, in their section, is like St. Francis or Cambridge Santee down here. So they play a bunch of 4A teams all year long. Well, then how do you seed that 5A team amongst other 5A teams that they've never played?
Gotcha.
Yeah, and so that's kind of why they moved towards the whole keeping classes together, and it's allowed for some really cool matchups. Like I think we got like Byron versus Benilde St. Margaret this past cycle, and that was one we never thought we'd see.
So is there anything you mentioned that 6A hasn't done it for like a while? Is there anything? There's nothing stopping that from happening. Like, let's just say you talked about how, like, the sections work in terms of like regular season. Like you're gonna play most of those guys that are in your section, but there are out of conference, or I guess is it out of conference or out of
conference, out of section? Yeah, pretty much both. Yeah.
So there are those games that you do have to schedule that are going to be outside of the requirement. And I guess as an outsider, I don't know how that works. If it's just head coaches like coming together, or it's from uppers like assigning and giving these guys their schedule. Is there a possibility or even a chance in the next, I don't know, 4 years we could see? I think it'd be really cool. I'm talking, again, prime time, get it in a good slot where people can watch it. Have like a premier 5A team, we'll say Elk River for this instance, plays a 6A team, or a really good 4A team plays a varsity game at a 6A team. Like, I wouldn't think there's anything to lose. I guess if you're a 6A team, you wouldn't want to schedule a lower class and lose, but I guess that's not, when we go back to it, the classes aren't aligned by skill. So at least from my perspective, a 6A program losing to a state team that's in 4A, like a Stewartville, like, I don't know who's going to if we match up any 6A team to Stewartville, I think it'd be an interesting game, like regardless of like the outcome. I would be interested in watching it, that's for sure. But I feel like the takeaway, like, is there a reason it happens that coaches are kind of like scared to do it? I don't know.
I don't know the
You're
coaches are necessarily like scared to do it. I think it's more so just the state high school league wants you to play against teams that you're going to see in the regular season and in the playoffs and kind of prepare you for that.
Gotcha. Well, I feel like that should change. I feel like we should go for some good matchups. I want TV. That's what I want. I want
Honestly, we might see
fireworks.
some cross class play this coming season when we get those schedules next week, supposedly next week, Monday. April 14th, the time of recording. But because as of right now, the only 4 teams that have asked for schedule relief in 6A that I'm aware of are Hopkins, Park Cottage Grove, Roseville, and Eastview. And that's only 4 teams. So you figure if they all play each other, well, that's only 3 games out of the regular season. Who do you play for the remaining 5?
Gotcha.
It's a little bit
Yeah.
easier for like maybe a Park or a Roseville because they have all those teams in their section out there. But for Eastview, do you say, okay, you got to play Park, Roseville, and Hopkins. Now for your remaining 5 games, you get Shakopee, Prior Lake, Lakeville South, Lakeville North, and Rosemount. Well,
Right.
and then how do you decide which teams in the section get to play them? Like suppose those 5 teams all get to play Eastview, but then Egan and Farmington don't.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I also think it's a like for the teams that are in the middle of classes. Let's just take Andover for example. Them going up to 6A for all we know, it's 2 years for right now because who knows what it's going to be at the next alignment cycle. I feel like it would be if we embraced cross class matchups, we could not lose a rivalry between Elk River and Andover for 2 years. That's given us like a lot of memorable moments and like just good football. If we were to like dig into it and more think of like matchups and rivalries and like preserving these things for Minnesota high school football, that like Andover going up for 6A for 2 years wouldn't be as big of a deal in terms of like rivalries because I know like Forest Lake when they got moved down to 5A, our biggest rival is White Bear. Like that's and I didn't get to play White Bear because we got moved down, which like is like between that's what Forest Lake cares about is beating White Bear. Like that's it's one of the biggest rivalries. So like in terms of that whole thing, I feel like there's a little bit of a little to be had in the cross class matchups that could preserve the high school football product a little more, especially for the like the fun rivalries that we want to see. And again, this is a consumer of high school football speaking, obviously, but I don't know.
Definitely. And that's kind of the hard part because this whole thing is fluid. It's ever changing. Like, I'm sure some people would probably say a more recent rivalry would be Egan versus Forest Lake. You guys have matched up a ton in the last 3 seasons, and we've gotten some great games out of that. Obviously
Right.
Forest Lake has won the last 3, but it's always been kind of fun games to watch. And touching on Andover, we'll talk about Andover and Rogers because they're both in the same boat. So yeah, Andover's always kind of been with Elk Rivers their big rival. But if you go back to like 2016 and earlier, in the regular season, Andover, sure, they were 5A, but they're playing against all those teams up north that were 6A. They're playing Uranoka, Blaine, Coon Rapids, Champlin. They're playing Centennial. So even though, yeah, they're 5A come playoff time, they were still playing all these 6A teams that they're rivals with. Then when they realign things, it's like, you're going to stick with just 5A. Well, now you're not playing any of the 4 other schools in your school districts. Kids that maybe you went to middle school with and they kind of branch off to other high schools. Now you're just never going to see them again or get to compete against them. The State High School League always says, hey, what's the most important for your school and your program when we do schedules? And the top 3 things at almost every class were preserve rivalries, teams of similar talent, and then teams within a decently close geographic location. We'll see if that plays out in 6A this year. Obviously, we touched on Moorhead earlier, but those are the 3 main points the coaches wanted to focus on, which is why, like, when I was kind of talking about my schedule predictions for 6A on my stream earlier, I was saying that, we've mentioned Rogers STMA. Prior to STMA moving up to 6A in 2017, that was like the arch rivalry, was the Knights and the Royals. Then
Mm-hmm.
estimate bumps up. Rogers loses their biggest rival. Now they got to go find other teams. So just kind of getting that change, and now we're going to get it hopefully again because Rogers and estimate they're in different sections. I'm assuming since none of those teams in Section 5 have requested schedule relief that I know of, Rogers is probably going to play all those other teams week 1 through 7, and then they get that one non-section game, kind of like Section 5 did last year. Like Maple Grove, we talked about earlier, played all the other teams in their section weeks 1 through 7. Then week 8, they get their one non-section game, and that happened to be Minnetonka. So if the State High School League sticks with that for that section, I'm like locking in that we're going to get Rogers versus STMA week 8.
That'll be good. Yeah, I think the whole just that aspect of it, because Forest Lake played Prior Lake in like the first game of the last 2 seasons, and that has been a treat for like both games. One was really low scoring, they've just been both really good games.
Oh yeah, that 7-6 matchup in 2023 all came down to that 2-point conversion.
Yeah. It's like, and again, that's kind of like the unfortunate reality because we're in this like 2-year kind of like life cycle of class and sections, and then for the next 2 years we can't play Prior Lake. So like starts the rivalry, and then it's like, all right, all done. Next one. And it's like, there is a good spot for that because I mean, Forest Lake playing Prior Lake it's good because those teams don't see each other, but then now they're not going to see each other for however long unless they meet in the playoffs.
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing because they're in different sections, so maybe they could clash in the playoffs. It all depends on the seeding and kind of where things fall into place. So,
last thing on just like going back to 6A playoffs, the section winners, do they get reseeded or do they stay?
So 6A does playoffs different from everybody else. So we kind of talked about, like, I'll bring 5A back up because that was my old wheelhouse. Only one team from each of those 8 sections makes the state tournament, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's because it's not like a night, like we have 43 teams. So it's never going to be like nice and easy. Like you've got 5 teams in section 5. Meanwhile, you've got 6 in some other sections. So it's not like a nice clean number. Whereas 6A, it's a nice even 32, and there's 8 teams, all within 4 sections. And if you want to see, I can flip over here. I actually have, that's last time. This is kind of the thing I was putting together, potential opponents. And then over here, season schedules. This would be, you're getting a look right now at the blank state tournament brackets that they use to determine 6A playoffs here. Okay. So what the State High School League does is they have 6 total brackets for the 6A tournament, just preset of like the number on the outside here. I'll zoom in on this bracket. And when I say us versus 4C for the bracket, that's just like the 1 seed of Section 3 and who they would play. So like, where would we be? So like the first seed out of Section 3 would be right there. And they'd play the 8th seed out of Forest Lake section, which is Section 4. And so, in this coming year, it's either going to be Roseville or Park Cottage Grove, since they've requested schedule relief. But basically what they do is, so those 8 teams or 8 seeds that we talked about in 4 sections, coaches all vote. They get seeded 1 through 8. And then all the State High School League does is randomly draw one of these 4 brackets. And then they just plug all the teams in. So like, who's the first seed of Section 3? Well, who knows? And so on and so forth.
Right.
And they just go through the coaches' rankings that they voted on and plug those teams in. And then they supposedly they randomly draw one, but I've always had a conspiracy theory about this. So I went back and I looked at every single state tournament we've had. And by some mere coincidence, the top 2 teams have always ended up on the opposite sides of the bracket. And usually the top team ends up against I guess what you consider the not as strong of the 1 seeds. So like if you think back to this past season, who was the top 1 seed in 6A? Maple Grove. Well, then who did everyone see as, record-wise, not the best of the 1 seeds? I guess the weakest of the 4? Mounds View. So funny enough, those 2 end up on the same side, and then Minnetonka and Lakeville North are on the other side. And then you
A
go back.
little manipulation going on here is what you're saying. Interesting.
Well, so I mean, if you want to get down to like technical terms, I mean, random drawing is pretty vague. So like last year, let me see if I have the state bracket from 2 years ago, actually, or from this past season. Because a lot of people don't know. I think I posted this on my personal Instagram. There were two possible combinations. I think it's on my other account. Bummer. 6A interactive. Yeah, I don't have it. But there were two potential brackets that had Maple Grove and Minnetonka/Lakeville North on the other side. So my theory is maybe they still randomly drew one of those two. They just threw out the other two that didn't have that matchup. Like otherwise, we would have ended up with like Maple Grove and Minnetonka over here, and they would have met in the state semis.
So they might. Okay, so there is, although conspiracy, they might be manipulating and maybe have like tiers of 1 seeds going into the tournament to try to get the best 2 teams to state.
Definitely. And it's not like they're manipulating the brackets. They're still like randomly picking these brackets. But say the top 2 teams next year are, I'll just say like Rose Mountain Centennial, for example. So you have to pick a bracket where section 3, the 1 seed, and section 5 are on opposite sides. So like this is the bracket from the 2019 tournament. Okay. So that one would be viable. Whereas like here was the 1 seed. Oh, that's 6. Not a good example. But you may have them be on the same side. So like, or okay, here's another example. Say like Eden Prairie and Shakopee are the top 2 teams in 6A. Well, then the bracket from 2022 and 2016 would probably get thrown out because you'd put EP right there at the top of section 6, and then Shaka would be the top of section 3 right there. They would clash right there in the state semis, assuming they won all their games up to that point. So gotcha. If that was the case, this bracket would probably get tossed, and they'd choose randomly out of one of the other ones that has them on the opposite sides of the bracket.
Interesting.
Yeah, and again,
good information.
That's mostly just my conspiracy theory. It's just a pattern that I happen to notice with all the state tournaments they've done since 2015 when Osseo beat Eastridge. Top 2 teams have always ended up on the opposite side of the bracket, even though statistically speaking, there was a low probability that that bracket gets picked. Or that even just like the probability that that specific bracket gets picked every single year. That's a pretty low percentage. So
I'm here for theories. I'm here for speculation, and conspiracy theories fall under that umbrella. So that is all good to know. The last, not last thing, but just like one of the things I noticed was when you were at your map, with there being an odd number of 5A teams in Class 5A, that means we're at least bound to get one cross-class matchup per week. Is that correct?
I mean, yeah, potentially that definitely is what that could mean. You know, so probably the team I'm looking at is Duluth East. You know, if just looking at their schedule, they don't play a lot of other 5A teams. And they've generally just kind of played the teams up there. And so we were talking about like districts versus sections. So sections for playoffs, they're with all these teams down here, right? But in terms of the regular season for their districts, let me just highlight section 7 here. They're actually playing all these 4A teams that are up in the Duluth area. So your Grand Rapids, Rock Ridge, Hermantown.
Wait, what did you just do? You confused me there.
Oh,
go back.
So
okay, so they're Duluth East is 5A, right?
Yep. So you have Duluth East, they're the 5A right there. And so for playoffs,
all these teams that you're hovering over down here are their section.
Correct.
So that's who they play in the regular. That's who they have to play in the regular season.
Not entirely. That's who they play in the playoffs.
Okay.
Yeah. No. So this is where it gets confusing because one of those points we touched on earlier was geographical location, and we kind of talked about that with Moorhead, how they have to drive to the Twin Cities. Is it really fair? So if I just pull the 5A map up really fast, and we'll add all the sections in here. Is it really fair to ask Duluth East? I mean, look, there's nobody around them. You have like this line of 5A teams, and then they're over here. Is it fair to ask them, like, hey, all 8 games of your season, you have to drive 2.5 hours down to the cities?
Moorhead type stuff over there.
Exactly, yeah. And even still, when Moorhead was here, like, I mean, you get these teams that are in, like, it's still far away, but they're out there in their near section. But yeah, so in the regular season, even though, yes, their playoff section is with all these teams down here, your Cambridge, Santee, St. Francis, Monticello's, their regular season districts. So like district/conference, the
So
teams
they
they
just
stack
get
up.
put in. Okay, so they play 4A regulars. That's kind of like the Force Lake example, what I was talking about.
Yep. And
They
I'll
play
sneak in
4A.
exactly. I'll sneak in some 3A teams here. So when you talk about kind of those cross-class play-ups and like matchups, you generally only see that further out in the state. Just because within the Twin Cities, we generally can find other teams to play.
Uh-huh.
Whereas, like, say, like we mentioned, Duluth East, they're surrounded by 3A, 4A teams. Like, I know last few years we've got ESCO versus Duluth East, first game of the season. Well, that's a 3A team playing a 5A team. So yeah, the further out you get from the cities, generally the more you get those kind of cross-class matchups.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Interesting.
and we talked earlier about not every 5A team might not necessarily be able to do good at a lower level. I want to say it was it 2 years ago when ESCO had Coy Perrick as a senior and they beat Duluth East like 60-0 or something like that. Obviously that's a 3A team beating a 5A team, so
Right.
really all just comes down to coaches and the kids that you have coming through their program. There's a lot of factors that play into that as opposed to just class.
I know the Metro gets like a lot of love and a lot of media, but those out of Metro teams, especially I wanted to get to like the northwest part, like I think the Fargo, because they play sections at the Fargo Dome, all
Yep.
those like teams up there. And I wanted to get to that because that one is good because they just like they chug. I was trying to get work off because it's obviously one field and they just go throughout the day. And those are section games. So it's not like, the reason I had a problem with the state games is because it is the state game. I think everybody should be watching that no matter like what. That's why it's so tough that it's at 9 a.m. or 11 a.m. But those section games, like I'm fine with that they have. I think they started Thursday and Friday and they kind of went all throughout the day. I was going to take work off, but again, I can't get to any of those section games because I'm not officially licensed. And another gripe that I have to be. I don't even know what hoops I have to jump through to get to go to playoff games, but I'm going to try to jump through those hoops, whatever I need to, for this upcoming season. But
Definitely. Yeah, you're right. And like you said, there's only so many games you can get to. I mean, like if you look, you have 6A there, you've got your 32 teams, and often they get the spotlight. Meanwhile, if you take that off, look at all that high school football we have to love and appreciate in the state of Minnesota. And every single team there deserves some love and coverage. So
and
you
there's
said,
like some of the best
so
players out there are not Metro teams. Like
mhm.
Roman Voss is like one of the, I think he might be the top, I think he is the top recruit of 26 and he's out there. But it's like a lot of the talent that comes, like I know there's a lot of D1 guys out there that and I talked to one of those, like I think it was Bo Bakken. He got to South Dakota State because he went to a camp, but like other, like I assume Division I schools aren't doing deep dives on like 9-player 1A 2A. Like that's look at how many schools are on the screen right now, 355. Like
Exactly.
talent is going to go through and it's going to slip through no matter what. And you're going to have, that's why you have good Division III, good players that play at any level because there's a lot of talent to go around. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
Well, I think I've taken enough of your time tonight. And I hopefully like I in just like pressing the record button to finishing, I've learned a lot. And that was kind of the point of wanting to have you on, is because I feel like I'm in the viewer's shoes more than I am in your shoes, although I'm trying to learn as much as I can and get to your knowledge at one point. I'm just not there yet. And I
Like we
think
said at the beginning, it's definitely a lot to take in, and a lot of it is ever changing. So, what we go over this year,
keep
maybe the
learning.
State High School League sees my conspiracy theory and they're like, all right, Coach Lantz is on to us. Time to make entirely new 6A state practice. So you never know.
Right. Yeah, so I hope you, the viewers that have stuck around the whole time, or at least just like if you tuned in, just got one thing out of it that you can kind of take away. And obviously my mission behind the Minnesota School Football Network is to drive to drive popularity, to drive exposure, and just anything we can to these high school football players that deserve it, and coaches as well. These programs up here that deserve love. I know I should have done this at the start. I'll do it at the end, and then I'll see what I can do at the start. But maybe I can give you an Instagram shout out or something. But go ahead and plug all yours. You just started a YouTube and Instagram. Go ahead.
Yeah, of course. On Instagram, it's just at Coach Ryan Lantz. I'm on there.
Pull it
Give me a
up. Pull it up.
follow.
Pull it up. Pull it up. Pull it up.
Oh, all
You
good.
got it?
Yeah.
No? Okay. This is your chance.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, and I was gonna say, Coach Ryan Lantz on Instagram. Go give me a follow. I do all kinds of stuff related to 6A primarily, just because obviously coaching at Lakeville South, that's kind of my wheelhouse, especially as we close in on the season. And YouTube, I do tons of film breakdown. Like you said, my last live stream, I'm probably gonna chop that up. Love streaming games on YouTube. I covered Shakopee versus Hopkins. So, like you said, it's just kind of cool to see
Is that on YouTube? Because
that
I've been wanting to do like film breakdowns, but a lot of like the angles and stuff like that, it's hard to get a
It
whole lot of
definitely
that
is super hard. Yeah, there's only so
control.
much you can see from that bird's eye view. Like something I didn't touch on with Shakopee, they play with really wide splits because they're an option team. Same with Centennial and Egan.
Yeah.
Whereas like Lakeville South, we have nice narrow splits. Same with Lakeville North. So stuff like that, it's kind of hard to see on film.
A fan huddle account also. I don't know. I don't know if the high school league can do anything, but football junkies want that. I want that to break down film. Give it to me.
Yeah, definitely. I think only coaches get that privilege, but hey, there's a lot of schools out there that are looking for coaches. Just within 6A, I've seen the Instagram accounts of Anoka's looking for coaches, Andover's looking for coaches. I think Coach B Scout posted on Forest Lake's football thing.
Yep.
They're looking for coaches too. So I mean, if anyone does want to get into coaching high school football in Minnesota, it's an absolutely fantastic experience. There's plenty of opportunities out there right now. So it's only a message away. Shoot a coach an email, even if you just want to volunteer. Never a bad time to get into it.
All right. Indeed. All right. So go follow Coach Lantz and all this social media stuff. He does a really good job. And just like the month that I've talked to him, that's why I wanted to get him on. And hopefully this isn't the last time you'll be on something of Minnesota High School Football Networks. But the knowledge that you had needed to be spread to the masses. And I think you did a good job of that. So thanks.
Yeah, appreciate it. And like I said, I'm always available if you need to ask any questions that might come up or anything else. And hey, who knows? Maybe we can do like a little schedule announcement breakdown next week when we get all the sections released Monday, or not sections, all the districts and schedules released. So.
Well, I'm here for it. You guys heard it here first. Stay tuned. There's definitely more content to come out over these next few weeks, and even in the summer. The content will never stop for high school football. It doesn't just start in the fall. So
for sure.
Thank you once again.
Yeah, and I just want to thank you really fast, because I don't think anyone, like at least that many people out there, appreciate the job that you're doing and giving all this coverage to all these high school football athletes. I think that's a wonderful job that you're doing, and it really is growing football as a sport in the state of Minnesota, where hockey is king and all that. So it's right. Really nice for you to give all these kids exposure and everything.
It's the uphill battle trying to turn football king in Minnesota. It's tough out here though. But yeah, that's definitely the mission. Definitely the mission. Well, thank you. Yeah, and thank you guys for viewing this. I know it got long, but I think it was all really good information. So awesome.